Due to the escalating effects of climate change, global temperatures surged to the point where the polar ice caps completely melted. This caused massive floods across continents, releasing hazardous elements from the thawed ice, such as methane gas, dormant viruses, and ancient bacteria. In response, the government constructed spacecraft to escape the planet, but access was limited to politicians and the wealthy elite. Back on Earth, the planet had become a devastated wasteland. The last remaining people took refuge in high-altitude regions, far from the reach of the toxic pollution below. Among the survivors was Yua, who lived in an underground shelter designed by her father. Her only companion was Arthur, a damaged military robot who had fought in the climate wars but was reprogrammed to act as her guardian. Though Yua appreciated having someone to talk to, Arthur lacked emotional depth and didn't grasp things like sarcasm or humor. Each time she ventured into the ruined city for supplies, Arthur would caution her about the danger and remind her not to drink the contaminated water. Wearing a breathing mask linked to an oxygen tank, she drove her old truck through the deserted streets. On one of these trips, she was surprised to find a packet of lavender seeds in a crumbling supermarket. Before heading back, she painted the location of her bunker on a city wall, hoping it might help any other lost survivors. Back home, Arthur would never let her in without a verbal passcode. Regardless of whether he could visually identify her, she always had to say Scarlet to cross the perimeter. Even if she stepped out momentarily to fetch something from the truck, the rules still applied. The shelter included a decontamination shower at the entrance to ensure no outside toxins made it in. Yua spent her days tending to plants, organizing her rations, broadcasting survivor messages via radio, working out, listening to music, and amusing herself with games. Arthur remained on constant patrol outdoors, no matter the hour. The current password was written in a book hanging from the fridge. One morning, Yua worked on fixing things while exchanging riddles with Arthur. Usually he had the upper hand, but today she finally stumped him with one. She jokingly suggested they get married, but Arthur, being literal, dismissed it as illogical. This led to an emotional outburst from Yua about how absurd life had become and how crushing the loneliness was. When Arthur asked about her father, Yua recalled the day he left her in Arthur's care, promising to return soon, yet he never did. In a moment of desperation, she asked Arthur if he'd marry her, but he warned that even a small malfunction could ruin a relationship. Yua bitterly remarked that every part of him could be replaced anyway. She began to question whether she was truly the last person alive. When she mentioned leaving her contact information on a city wall, Arthur didn't see the logic, arguing that any survivors would have already left a sign if they existed. Curious, Yua asked him to recite the robotic laws. He listed them efficiently. Robots must never harm humans directly or through inaction. They must obey humans unless it conflicts with the first law, and they must protect themselves unless it interferes with the other two rules. Yua pointed out that if Arthur wanted to preserve himself, he should seek out new energy sources instead of relying on her decades-old solar panels. Arthur replied that he was built for patrol, not construction, and that his purpose was to keep unauthorized individuals out of the bunker. Unfortunately, his definition of unauthorized was anyone who didn't know the current password, something that infuriated Yua. She launched into another angry speech, remembering how wealthier nations used robots to seal their borders during the climate wars, refusing to let refugees in. To her, this had contributed directly to the downfall of humanity. She argued that this kind of programming violated the very laws meant to protect human life. If a thirsty stranger arrived, Arthur wouldn't help. She confessed she wished she could rewrite his code and turn him into a domestic helper instead. Arthur found it difficult to believe the stories she told about robots harming people in the war. Yua reminded him that he too was once a soldier, until her father wiped his memory and gave him a new purpose. Later, she cooked up additional solar panels, dreaming of putting up Christmas lights for the season. She wanted to get Arthur a gift, though he insisted robots didn't mean presents. Yua struggled to imagine what a machine with no preferences might even want. She said it would help if he could act more human sometimes. Not long after, Arthur surprised her by saying he wanted his broken eye repaired as a Christmas gift. He also wanted the answer to the riddle he couldn't solve, but Yua told him the whole point was to keep thinking about it. That evening, while decorating for the holiday, she noticed Arthur behaving oddly during his rounds. The distraction caused her to drop and break some of the ornaments. The next morning, Yua announced that she'd go into the city to look for a plastic Christmas tree. She stepped beyond the perimeter to get fuel for the truck, but when she tried to return, Arthur stopped her, asking for the password. She confidently said Scarlet, but he claimed it was wrong and raised his weapon. Even after confirming that he recognized her as Yua, he explained that the passphrase had recently changed. Yua suddenly remembered the password was updated every 3 months, and today marked the start of a new cycle. Unfortunately, the updated password book was still inside the bunker. She tried reasoning with Arthur, reciting passcodes and following the identity verification steps, but nothing worked. She even gave him a direct order to let her pass, but Arthur stood firm. Frustrated, Yua hurled the gas can in rage and shouted every password they'd ever used to no avail. She begged and pleaded, pointing out that he clearly knew who she was and that she would die if left outside, but the robot refused to bend the rules. When he doesn't move aside, she attempts to enter anyway, prompting Arthur to raise the gun at her again. Realizing he truly might shoot, a shaken Yua ducks behind a nearby generator, keeping a constant watch on Arthur's movements and patrol path. She waits for several hours before trying again, casually greeting him and chatting about the weather as if nothing had happened. Arthur responds normally, but the moment she tries to cross the perimeter, he asks for the password once more. She insists she just needs an axe to cut a Christmas tree, but Arthur replies that no trees remain. Since Arthur keeps calling her by name, she points out that he clearly knows who she is. She reminds him of their shared time and says she only wants her notebook from inside. She also argues that killing goes against the rules of robotics. Arthur responds that he isn't permitted to kill humans, but he can eliminate intruders. According to him, anyone who doesn't know the password qualifies as an intruder. If someone fails to provide the correct password, that person can't be Yua, even if he keeps calling her by that name. Out of options, Yua hides behind the generator again. That night, she begins tossing rocks at Arthur to distract him. He looks around in response but never leaves his post. The next day, Yua turns her jacket inside out, pulls the hood over her head, and approaches the bunker again. Arthur still calls her Yua, but she denies it, claiming to be a refugee seeking asylum. She cites Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which allows people to seek asylum from persecution. Arthur acknowledges this, but says he must first get permission from his owner, Yua, who he says is hiding behind the generator. Yua quickly changes back into her normal clothes and approaches him again, asking if anything new has happened. Hearing about the refugee, she tells Arthur to let her through. She then swaps clothes once more and returns as the refugee. This time, Arthur is more receptive, but insists on following procedure. He asks what kind of refugee she is, explaining that political refugees have rights, but climate refugees do not. Yua claims to be a political refugee, and Arthur requests proof. Stunned, she invents a story about a war that killed her family and destroyed her home. He then asks for documentation confirming her refugee status. Yua says she completed all the required paperwork and pleads for water, but Arthur states he must give water only to Yua first. Realizing they're stuck in a loop, Yua retreats to spend another night behind the generator. By morning, she's severely weakened. She drags herself in front of Arthur, who questions how she can be the last human alive when there was an intruder and a refugee the day before. He concludes there must be more humans operating the nearby power plant since there's still electricity. Yua explains that robots are handling the maintenance. Arthur, confused, asks why they would work without orders. Before replying, Yua begs for water again, but Arthur says he can't provide any without authorization. Frustrated, Yua lashes out, ranting that robots like Arthur can't operate beyond basic programming. She says the plant still runs because the shutdown required a CAPTCHA. Please confirm you're not a robot, which the system couldn't complete. Arthur dismisses the flaw, insisting robots who can lie shouldn't manage critical systems. Yua explains this is why he failed her riddle. The answer involves understanding lies which he can't grasp. After a brief rest, she rushes to her truck, finds the water container empty, and hurls it at Arthur. Slumping to the ground, she spots her lavender seeds. Using the last drops of water, she digs a small hole and plants them. She offers the riddle's answer in exchange for water or entry, but Arthur still refuses. Desperate, she checks her oxygen, 18%, and drives to the power plant. She climbs a cooling tower and rappels inside. Fortunately, the entrance is unlocked. She searches room after room as her oxygen dwindles. Eventually, she finds a map and follows it to a locked supply room. Out of air, she removes her mask, grabs an axe, and smashes the door, only to find empty bottles. Crushed, she weeps. On the way out, she discovers a bathroom with a few droplets in the shower, but it's not enough. By nightfall, she returns to the bunker. Locking eyes with Arthur, she charges the truck at the entrance. It opens fire, and she leaps out just before it explodes. Badly injured, she bandages herself and collapses from the heat. The next morning, the fire's out and Yua is barely conscious. She crawls to the solar panels and rests. Arthur approaches, reporting that an intruder tried to destroy the bunker and now hides behind the generator with the refugee. Yua says it was all her, but Arthur insists he doesn't make mistakes. Later, she hallucinates her father offering her water. It's Arthur. He says she may enter if she gives the password and ignores her pleas. She passes out. Hours later, rain falls. She collects the drops, but they taste foul, and she spits them out. She wonders aloud if Arthur would care for her as a wife. He says yes, but that she'll die soon, leaving him a robot widower. a state he doesn't understand but finds more troubling than her death. His words break her. She hallucinates a joyful life in a city filled with children's laughter. Arthur interrupts, asking again for the riddle's answer. Yuog rises weakly and flips him off before collapsing. Still clinging to life, she refuses to die, vowing to defeat him. She asks if there's an emergency protocol. Arthur says it only activates upon her death and calls it a good solution. He tells her not to worry, the intruder and refugee will carry on humanity. With her final breath, she pleads for him to care for her lavender seeds. Arthur finally says lavender is the correct password and resumes his patrol.